Ella Gertrude Clanton, known as Gertrude, was born in 1834 just outside Augusta to Mary Luke and Turner Clanton.
Turner Clanton began adult life as a young planter in the 1820s and apparently was quite adept as a businessman. And at the time of the outbreak of the Civil War, he was one of the wealthiest men in the state of Georgia.
Ella Gertrude Clanton is best known for the extensive journal she kept of her life before, during, and after the Civil War. An invaluable resource for historians, the journal spans 41 years, chronicling the period between 1848 and 1889.
She started the diary when she was 14 years old, a wealthy, privileged young girl of the plantation aristocracy in Augusta, Georgia. She had a very carefree life. She loved to read, loved to write. She was very intelligent. She didn't know it at the time, but she would keep that diary for 41 years, on and off. And you really have her life unfolding in the diary.
At age 14, Clanton left home to attend Wesleyan Female College, later Wesleyan University, in Macon. She completed her undergraduate studies in 1851, a rare accomplishment for a woman of that time, even among the Southern elite.
And she describes what life was like at Wesleyan and graduating in 1851. After she left Wesleyan, she married her Princeton-educated beau and started her charmed life.
She was married to J. Jefferson Thomas, a local planter's son, and she had, I believe, 10 children over the years from before the war to stretching quite a ways after the war. Her husband served for a time in the Confederate Army and then came home, spent the rest of his life trying to recreate for himself and his family the planter life, the antebellum planter life, and it did not work.
Throughout the 1850s, Thomas led a typical life for a woman of her time, place, and class. She performed little physical labor as the mistress of a large plantation supported by numerous slaves. Of her 10 children, only 7 survived past age 5. Her last child was born in 1875 when she was 41 years old.
And then the Civil War came. Her family was devastated. They lost everything. Her husband went bankrupt after the war. There was horrific family strife, legal cases of family fighting over the money that was left after the Civil War. And she pours all of this into the diary. She thought no one would ever read it except her children, so she was very honest. Some diarists of the 19th century edited their diaries and they knew they would be published, so there's an authenticity here.
She documented a great many of her private thoughts, some of which were not kind towards the South, towards the prevailing social institutions of the South. She pretty much, in her diary, called a spade a spade.
During the Civil War, she did what women did for the Civil War effort. You know, they belonged to the Ladies' Aid Society. They prepared food on the railroad platform for men coming through Augusta. They did sewing, they made cartridges, and she writes about that in the diary. She visited the hospital, visited the wounded. But she gradually got involved in women's church groups, which was a novel thing back then. It's hard for us to realize today that women weren't supposed to be public. They were supposed to stay in the home and be private.
By the end of the war, Thomas reluctantly began to accept what a Southern defeat would mean for her and her region. Her family's financial situation forced her to seek employment as an elementary school teacher, something that women of her class would never have considered before the war. Thomas taught from 1878 to 1884, but her husband's alcoholism and poor management of money prevented the family from recovering economically to the extent that many other planters had by the 1880s.
Her husband was Princeton educated, and he had been preparing to be a Southern gentleman. And, you know, he tried his hand in business, and that went bankrupt. He didn't have any money to hire laborers after the war, so they had land, but they had no money to hire laborers. They couldn't pay taxes, and it was devastating to him. So he was more or less never able to recover from the Civil War. He celebrated the Civil War the rest of his life by riding around in Atlanta on his horse in parades in his Civil War uniform, but he had actually purchased a substitute during the war. He only served 9 months, but I think she probably had things to say about him that some family members did not approve of.
I think she got her drive and her intelligence probably from her father and from her experiences at Wesleyan. As a college graduate, her mind had certainly been stretched and improved at Wesleyan. I think probably combined to lead her to the accomplishments which she made.
Despite the downturn in her economic status, Thomas spent the latter years of her life involved in numerous civic and social organizations. In 1903, she was publicly commended by Susan B. Anthony and was made a life member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
In the Women's Christian Temperance Union, she starts writing, and that led her into her work in the suffrage movement. These women in the Christian Temperance Union wanted to get legislation. They wanted women to be admitted to the University of Georgia. They wanted women to have control of their own wages. They wanted guardianship rights of their children. They wanted the age of protection for women raised. I mean, these were real activist women, but they couldn't get anything done because they had no power. So they said, we've got to get the vote. And that was radical.
Later in life, she became quite active in the suffragette movement. She knew Susan B. Anthony personally. We have a letter from Susan B. Anthony to her. I'd like to say somewhat instrumental in helping to do her part to bring about the vote for women, which finally passed in 1920, 13 years after her death.
Here was a woman in Georgia in 1899 not only saying women should get the vote, but that women should be equal to men. So we just must give her credit. And some of the women she worked side by side with have already been recognized by the Georgia Woman of Achievement.
In addition to her diary kept from 1848 to 1889, she also was an avid scrapbook compiler. She would peruse the Atlanta and Augusta papers and sometimes papers from farther off, which came by train from New York and Washington, and cut out clippings of just about anything which struck her fancy. In a way, they're a hodgepodge, but a hodgepodge of some value.
So one expression that women used is that women were finding their voices. Women were gradually being heard, and that's what these women finally did. They found their voice, and they would speak up. And that her writing these articles and these press releases, she was finding her voice and being heard.
Ella Gertrude Thomas died on May 11, 1907, after suffering a stroke. Her descendants proudly retained her voluminous collection of personal journals for 3 generations. In 1957, Duke University Library purchased the journals from Thomas's family, and an edited selection of her writings was published in 1990 by Virginia Ingram Burr, entitled The Secret Eye, the Journal of Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, 1848 to 1889.
Ella Gertrude died in 1907, and we still didn't have the vote until 1920. So a lot of these women spent their life working for these causes, but they did not see the fruition. But they didn't give up. They kept on going.
Well, she stands out, I think, in terms of what she accomplished and what she contributed, both to our historical understanding of the age and to advancements in women's rights, namely the right to vote.
I think that Georgia Woman of Achievement appreciated the diary. I think we all appreciate the diary. But I think when you combine it with her suffrage work, you see how truly outstanding this woman was.